because indeed a very informative and interesting session. Of music. Of music. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So thank you, Deepak, for a very informative and interesting session. Now we shall proceed to the third session, that is the lumbar discectomy session. As all of you know, that lumbar discectomy is one of the most common surgical procedures performed by any spine surgeon, and with the advent of minimally invasive spine surgery, endoscopic lumbar discectomy has fast become the procedure to know for all the spine surgeons. In this session, the faculty members will be discussing with the various methods of endoscopic discectomies. And so I would like to begin the session, and I would like to request Dr. Chandan Mohanty, who is a consultant spine surgeon, Bombay Hospital, Mumbai, to please be the panelist. Sir, it's an honor and privilege for us that you have kindly agreed to be the panelist for this session. Thank you and welcome, sir. Now I invite Dr. Jayesh Sadara, Associate Professor, SGPGI, to deliver his presentation on the surgical anatomy for lumbar endoscopic discectomy. Dr. Jayesh, please.
Very good morning to all of you. In the previous session, we have seen regarding the surgical landmark of the TLIF and pedicle screw fixation. Now we move ahead toward the surgical anatomy and the important landmarks of the minimal invasive discectomy procedures. The important surgical landmarks of the spines are the spinous process, lamina. Here, this important point is the laminofasciate junction, superior laminofasciate junction. Here, the inferior laminofasciate junction. The facet joint is formed by the inferior articular process of the superior vertebra and the superior articular process of the inferior vertebra. Now, these two articular facets unite with a 45-degree angle with the sagittal plane. Now, this superior articular process is directed and faced towards the roof of the foramen and the canal. So the superior articular process is always the culprit which compresses the root, and this is supposed to be decompressed here. But the inferior articular process is always act as a window to reach the target. Now the line joining between the superior articular process and the inferior articular process, this part is known as the pars interarticularis, and approximate width is 1 centimeter. Now it is very important to understand the anatomy of the ligamentum flavum. It has a right and the left half, superficial as well as a deep part. So superficial part is attached to the outer inferior margin of the superior lamina and outer superior margin of the inferior lamina. But the deep part attachment is extended to the 1/3 of the lower part of the upper lamina, and similarly upper 1/3 of the inner surface of the lower lamina. The deep part is also extended within the foramen. It's going across the foramina to form a subarticular part of the ligamentum flavum here, and this is very surgically important because this is normally a 3 millimeter part, but in case of hypertrophy it becomes 8 millimeter, and it's about to decompress the root particularly. So this subarticular part of the foramen, it merge here in the with the outer facet capsules of the facet joint. Now coming to the standard laminectomy. So the bony extent which is removed in the standard laminectomy is the spinous process, and the complete laminectomy, this complete laminectomy extended till the line joining between the superior and inferior laminofasciate junction here. Now in order to preserve all the midline spinous process and the interspinous ligament, it preserves the biomechanics of the spine, the minimal invasive discectomy become popularized, and this minimal invasive discectomy and the decompression procedure can be achieved by either the interlaminar window, or the foraminal window from here. Now, all the standard minimal invasive discectomy, the most standard technique is by this matrix tube, or the endoscopic discectomy can also be performed by the test-and-do endoscopic tube. Now, suppose you are planning the L3-4 discectomy. So, here is the L3-4 disc space. Whether you do a tubular discectomy or the endoscopic discectomy, the docking point of the minimal invasive discectomy is exactly at the inferior half of the superior lamina. Inferior half of always the superior lamina, not inferior. So ideal tube view, should be the upper half should contain the inferior half of the superior lamina, the lower half contain the interlaminar space, and lateral part should contain the lateral margin of the inferior articular process. Now the question is, why always superior? To understand that, the two surgical important landmark is very important, and that is superior and inferior laminofacet junction here. Now this superior laminofacet junction is corresponding to the shoulder of the nerve root here, the shoulder of the nerve root exactly. So the thumb rule is the decompression always should be achieved. Decompression should be achieved from the shoulder to the axilla, always from the downward, never from axilla to the shoulder. So here, to explain, I have already drilled this inferior articular process, and we can see here the shoulder of the nerve root is corresponding to the superior laminofacet junction. In order to expose that, you have to drill the medial 1/3 of the inferior articular process here. Now, the other important landmark is the inferior laminofacet junction here. Now, why it is important? Because there is also this corresponding to the corresponding to the traversing nerve root where it enter into the foramen. Exactly this point where you have a excessive compression from the superior articular process osteophytes. Now, once you drill this part, you can easily decompress the foramina. This is also known as a foraminotomy, and you can completely free the traversing nerve root from shoulder till it reached the foramen here. Now, suppose if patient have a bilateral compression of the nerve root, it can be easily decompressed with the ipsilateral side. You just have to drill the 3 mm of the base of the spinous process. Already I have drilled, and you can see here that from here you can easily decompress the contralateral foramina from here. This is known as over the top decompression. Always remember that once you drill the pars interarticularis, you always feel the lateral margin of the pars interarticularis, because 5 to 6 mm of the pars should be preserved in order to avoid segmental instability. Now, in advent of the recent endoscopic system, the most recent one is a full endoscopic system. So, just you need a full endoscopic system. This means complete things by percutaneous way. So, just you need a 6 to 9 mm incision to dock this 6 to 9 mm outer cannula endoscope, either the transforaminal or the interlaminar endoscope. And the advantage is you can do all the discectomy via interlaminar window without laminotomy, or sometimes you just have to drill the superior laminofacet junction and exactly dock the tube here, and you can do a discectomy. So this interlaminar discectomy has a 3 variation. One is a uniportal, which I am showing already. Other is biportal. In the biportal endoscopy, here from the one incision you can introduce the endoscope, and the another port you can introduce the working channel of instrument, but exact docking point is the superior laminofacet junction. The third variation of the interlaminar endoscopy is a midline laminotomy and do a contralateral foraminotomy, and this is mainly done and indicated, especially at the higher level of L2, L3 and L1 level, where the facet joint is vertical, and you have to preserve the ipsilateral facet joints in order to avoid segmental instability. Now coming to the anatomy of the foramen. Now foramen is lied between two pedicles. So roof is formed by the inferior articular process and the superior articular process. The base is formed by the disc and the inferior end plate of the superior vertebra. Here, the upper one third of the foramen is occupied with the root as well as the important vessels, whereas the lower two third of the foramen is occupied by the fat and fibrous tissue, which is relatively safe. Now, in case of the foraminal as well as extraforaminal disc herniation, there is a compression of both exiting nerve root and the traversing nerve root. So to decompress that, the transforaminal discectomy is the ideal procedure. Now, Dr. Parviz Kamban has explained this Cambian triangle, which can be explained by the triangle. So this is the safety triangle. The hypotenuse is formed by the exiting nerve root. The height of the triangle or the midline border is formed by the traversing nerve root, and the base is formed by the end plate of the inferior vertebra here. So once you can drill the inferior and superior articular process to use this safety triangle, you expand it and you can put a cage from as this is known as a TLIF fusion. Now, if you want to do a transforaminal discectomy, the needle is introduced the 25° from the skin plane. Then the plan is to hit the needle exactly at the superior articular facet first, and then you negotiate the needle downward to enter into cannula via the safety triangle, to enter into the annulus, and then you remove the disc from inside to outside technique. Now sometimes this foramen is narrow and you have to drill the superior articular facet via reamers. This is also known as the foraminoplasty. Now this needle gradually then repressed with the cannula by a dilator, and the docking point of the cannula is exactly at the posterior one third of the disc space up to here, and exactly the docking point should be at the base of the herniation. Now very important point regarding the position of the patient. While doing the position of the patient, the maximum lumbar flexion helps in open the interspinous process, interspinous distance, and the widening of the interlaminar distance, and that can exactly prevent you the excess bony removal. Sometimes you need not require a laminotomy even, and this is to be done for discectomy. But for the lumbar canal decompression, it is always preferable to decompress in the neutral position. So this is what some important tips regarding the minimal invasive discectomy. Now let's move forward to our further session, in which our esteemed course faculty will show you the surgical endoscopic video and the technique. Thank you very much. Very good morning.
Knowing the anatomy of the region that the surgeon wants to operate upon is perhaps the most important part of any surgery. And I would like to thank Dr. Jayesh for covering all the important aspects of the anatomy of the lumbar spine with respect to discectomy. We move on to our next speaker, Dr. Satnam Chabda. He is the Director Neuroscience Center, Gangaram Hospital, New Delhi, and he would be speaking on interlaminar discectomy using the disc-induced technique. Dr. Satnam Chabda, please.
Good morning. Today I'm going to talk about endoscopic interlaminar discectomy. This technique is also known as microendoscopic discectomy. Why microendoscopic discectomy? Because it is basically microdiscectomy which is performed under endoscopic vision through a tubular retractor. We do the same procedure what we do under microdiscectomy. Now, there are several tubular retractors are available in the market, like Metric System, Destendo, EasyGo, and Endospine Plus, which I have designed. I use Endospine Plus I've been using it since last 15 years or so. Started using it 2005. Before that, I was using Descendo tube, and this device was published in 2019 in Acta Neurosurgica. This is basically a modified Descendo tube, and which is something between the Descendo tube and EasyGo system. It is a smaller diameter than the Descendo tube. It is about two-thirds of the diameter of Descendo tube, and it is hollow from inside. Like you must have seen the Descendo tube, it has got multiple channels through which you pass the instruments, but here you have just two channels, one for the telescope and other bigger free space to pass the instruments, like you have in EasyGo system, and its diameter is much smaller than the Descendo tube, so it becomes easy to manipulate the instruments and easy to handle the instruments, and you can use normal instruments like Carrison punch, bipolar also, and it becomes easy to perform and learn the surgery. This is just to show you a Descendo tube which has got multiple channels. The instruments here move in a fixed direction, so it becomes difficult to manipulate the instruments. And this is the Matrix tube, and this is EasyGo system. So indications of microdiscectomy are basically same as you have for microdiscectomy. Endoscopic microdiscectomy is same as you have for microdiscectomy. You can use this technique for all kind of lumbar degenerative disc diseases where you want to perform the neural decompression. You can operate extruded disc, contained disc, migrated disc, central disc, lateral disc, far lateral disc, canal stenosis, single or multiple levels. This is how I position my patient on two bolsters, one under the chest, another one under the pelvis. Abdomen is free, and it is a natural lie of the spine. So there are lesser chances of venous congestion. And then I use a Descendo device to localize the level where I want to go. It has got a horizontal bar and two vertical bars. So it's a very good non-invasive method to localize the level. And then about 1.5 centimeter incision is marked on the side where you want to go, about 1 centimeter from the midline, just on the lateral edge of the spinous process. And this is the video external view, and this is the level is being localized under X-ray control, and then the incision is marked. About 1.5 centimeter, as I told you, 1 centimeter from the midline, and skin, subcutaneous tissue, and fascia is cut with the knife. And then I use a scissors which goes close to the spinous process. You cut the attachment of muscle with the spinous process and go up to the lamina. You can feel the lamina and strip off the muscles from the lamina. Use an osteotome to strip off the muscles from the lamina only, not the spinous process. And then a outer tube with obturator inside. The tube is passed and docked on the lamina, and soft tissue on the lamina and interlaminar space is removed. And then again we perform a check X-ray to see the level, whether that level is correct. And this is how the tube is held and manipulated. You can see doesn't require any fixation. It's very stable because of the thickness of the muscles. The tube is very stable, can easily be moved up and down medially and laterally. The tip of the instruments are always under view because telescope is fixed with the tube and tube is moving with the instruments. So tip of the instrument is, you can see here, is always under view. You never have a blind area. And you perform the surgery under endoscopic vision. You can use a drill also. And once you finish the surgery, it's very easy to close. You apply just 1 or 2 stitches in the fascia and then subcutaneous tissue, and that's all. This is now the endoscopic view. This is, you can see the ligamentum flavum, interlaminar space. This is the lamina on the left side, L4-5 level, and this is superior, inferior side, medial and lateral, and the fenestration is being performed. We start along the lower border of the lamina, as we do on the microdiscectomy, and remove the bone up to the attachment, upper limit of attachment of the ligamentum flavum. The medial facetectomy is performed with the same Carrison punch or the drill, and dura is exposed. We go up to the lateral edge of the dura to identify the nerve root. And once you identify the nerve root is retracted medially depending upon the location of disc herniation. And you identify the disc, herniated disc. Here you can see this is the herniated disc here. One uses a normal knife to make a cut in the annulus. And then you pass a Carrison, this pituitary ronger, to remove the herniated part of the disc. One can go into the disc space to remove the free pieces there. And here it was a large fragment lying there, which has been removed. And now the nerve root is free and it has been decompressed completely. This is just to show you that one can use a drill to perform the bony decompression. It's very easy to use a drill. This is a small video clip of far lateral disc herniation, in which instead of interlaminar approach, we use an intertransverse approach and perform a fenestration on the lateral edge of the pars. You can see this is the far lateral disc herniation here. And here, this is the lamina on the right side, L3, L4-5. And here we perform the fenestration. These far lateral discs are generally sequestrated discs, and they press on the ganglion of the exiting nerve root. So we aim to identify the exiting nerve root here. And this is the exiting nerve root has been exposed. And these discs, sequestrated discs, are generally lying in the axilla of the nerve root, far lateral disc herniation. And these are generally free fragment, and they come out with manipulation. And now you can see the exiting nerve root is lying free. So in last 17 years, I have operated nearly 2,000 patients endoscopically, out of which 1,500 were disc herniation and 500 were canal stenosis. And most of these cases were L4-5 and L5S1 level. There was no major complication, no nerve root injury in these series. 35 patients had minor dural tear. This is just to show the incision, which could easily be covered with a band-aid. Thank you very much. Thanks for the patient.
Thank you, Dr. Satnam, for a wonderful presentation, especially the modification that you have made. Our next speaker will be discussing another modification of the interlaminar approach, and he will be talking about interlaminar fully endoscopic discectomy. I now request Dr. Sukumar Sura, who is a consultant neurospine surgeon at the Telangana, to please deliver his lecture. Dr. Sukumar, please.
Hi everyone. The next few minutes we'll just go through the technique of full endoscopic discectomy interlaminar approach. For any spine surgery, most of the time the purpose is to decompress the neural structures, either the pathology in the form of disc, ligament, osteophytes or hypertrophied facet. There are various options which we practice either in the form of microdiscectomy, tubular discectomy or easy-go or distendo techniques. But most of the time they have some limitations in the form of tissue trauma, bloody field or 0 degree scopes we use. As a result of this, there are limited magnification, reach and mobility and maneuverability. We can overcome with these limitations in the form of full endoscopic spine surgery, where we can use angled scopes with small tubes so that the scar is less, the maneuverability and the reach is better, where we can reach the opposite lateral recess and the foramen easily. And biggest advantage is the clarity because of the saline irrigation. So most of the time we can do almost all pathologies of spine using full endoscopic techniques. Definitely there is a learning curve where we start with a simple lumbar discectomy, then we start doing lateral recess decompressions, then bilateral decompressions and later fusion. So we use various size of angled scopes from starting from 7.5 mm outer diameter to 11 mm outer diameter with a working channel of 4.3 mm to 6.5 mm working channels, and high speed drills and high frequency RF is required. Setup when we are operating here, I can see where I am standing on the right side of the patient and the CM is in situ. This helps us to see the level time to time. Then the monitor is on the right side when we are operating on the left side, and again there is a CM monitor with sister standing on the right side of the surgeon when we are operating on the left side. So planning is a key when we are operating interlaminar endoscopy. We need to understand what are the components which are causing compression here. So when we see here the disc causing compression or the ligament also causing the stenosis. So this planning helps us whether we need to drill the facet or how much lateral we need to drill or how much lamina we need to remove and how big is the interlaminar window. So this helps us planning to drill whether drill the facet or lamina more. Once we take a X-ray shot, we need to understand to superimpose the MRI findings here so that we can understand how laterally we should go to get the desired result like on the right side. Also, there are superior and inferior end plate osteophytes or the hard fibrous structures where we need to address. Otherwise, just simple discectomy might have a residual symptoms. We just go through a video here, a 29-year female with right radiculopathy. You can see here there is a prolapse in L5S1 with wide interlaminar window. Patient is positioned and just take AP image and this is AP image required. Put a small stab, 7 to 8 mm stab incision, then pass the dilator and check on AP. This is what a desired result should be, and lateral you stop at the facet junction. One you pass the sleeve and lateral MRI X-ray is taken. Once you take, this is a scope where you have irrigation port, we have a suction port if necessary, and it is connected to the camera, then a light side. So you see how I am holding the scope with middle and little finger, ring and little finger there, and you can see up and down movements are very easy. Important is the supero-inferior movements. You can see the maneuverability and mobility here, medial lateral. Once we go inside, we see the fibers here, 12 o'clock being the medial, 6 o'clock being towards the surgeon side. Here, because we are on the right side, 3 o'clock is a head end side and 9 o'clock is the leg inside. You start removing these small muscle fibers little bit, so you can start seeing the yellow ligament already here. So once we remove the muscle fibers, there is small bleeders which we can just coagulate. Once we have coagulate, you take a CM shot to confirm the location. Then small nick is given using a cutter. So once a nick is done here, you can see we just cut it, but try to rotate the scope and see what we are cutting. So this maneuver is very important, and cut towards the surgeon, means towards 6 o'clock, so that once it is cut, we may make a small phlebotomy there. The saline irrigation itself will push the thecal sac, and you can see the epidural fat there. A little bit of fat is removed so that we can see the thecal sac and the disc very clearly. You can see the clarity here. Such is the clarity where we can see the globules of fat and the fine vessels on the disc. You can see here is the lateral edge of the root. I'm just mobilizing that, and I'm just clearing the tissue on the disc bulge here. I'm just coagulating whatever the small bleeders, and the minute details are excellently appreciated here. And you can see I'm using the sleeve and rotate it so that I can retract the now. So that sleeve is acting as a retractor now. So it is protecting my traversing root there. And I take a sharp knife here and just put a stab on the bulge here. You can see this diseased annulus which is thinned out here. I am using the cutting punch again. So I'm just cut and make this annulotomy little bit bigger, few millimeter annulotomy, and you can see the extruded fragment. So just I'm removing the extruded fragment. Here, because of the clarity, you can see the minute detail very clearly where we are removing the extruded fragment, and there is no bloody field around. So you can see what is above, what is below, what is lateral and medial to what I am removing. So the chance of nerve injury is also very less because we are appreciating the anatomy so well. Once bit by bit the extruded fragment and other loose fragments are removed, just use the RF to coagulate the edges. And the biggest advantage here is once we remove the extruded fragment, we can appreciate the hard things. Once we are removing the soft things, we need to appreciate the hard things whether they are causing any neural compression. So once this is, you can see here I have removed all the soft fragments here. There is attained hemostasis. Now superiorly you can see that edge, superior edge of that bulge is rubbing the nerve there. You can see that. So I try to cut it. I try to cut that fibrous edge and flatten it out so that patient should not have a residual radicular symptoms. So even in open surgery or microdiscectomy, we do these things. When we see a chronic bulge or a chronic hardened fragment, we try to remove that. So flatten the hump. So here same thing, but here we are seeing such a clear vision is the key. Because of this, we are able to identify the structures very well. So I have removed the fibrous content. You can see a small bony spike at the edge there. I use a hand mill and I am just flattening it out here. So once this is flattened, I just flatten this out. Once this is flattened out, so superiorly the nerve is completely free there. So there is nothing else. So this is the body of L5 you can see, and it is clear now. You can see that there is no hump disturbing the now. Once this is done, then we'll go inferiorly. So this is done now. Then we'll go inferiorly and see anything fibrous structures are there inferiorly. So I can rotate the cannula. You can see how I rotated the cannula and use this cannula as a retractor at the same time and protect the now. So you can see I've cut that fibrous structure towards inferiorly also. I flattened the entire inferior surface, superior surface, and there is no hard structures there. Nerve is completely free, and medially there is small fibrous hump that I am cutting now. You can see that. So these fine details are very well appreciated here because of the irrigation and the small cannula which we are using. You can now see the entire traversing route is decompressed nicely. I'm using coagulating in a small beader, and you can see the finest was vessel is seen, and you can see just I coagulated that, and now you can see the entire traversing route is completely free, superiorly and inferiorly, and I just check medially anything is there, so there's no soft fragment, hard fragment, everything is removed, and the whole thecal sac is well decompressed, and you can see the fat is still there, and phlebotomy, so small phlebotomy, and I'm coming out here, the muscle just falls, and there is no contused muscle here, so muscle just falls down with just a dilated muscle, and with a small incision it is done. So immediate post-op is done. You can see the entire fragment is out. No tissue is violated there. The small phlebotomy, we have done a disc removal with a small incision without any collateral damage. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sukumar, for an excellent talk. The videos were exceptional, and the delegates would have been greatly enriched by learning the technique. We shall take the questions at the last. So I now request the next speaker, Dr. Girish Datar, who is a consultant endoscopic spine surgeon in Miraj, Maharashtra, and he would be speaking on the percutaneous transforaminal lumbar discectomy. Dr. Girish, please.
Hello everyone. Today we are going to speak about one more technique in transforaminal surgery, and that is going to be the outside-in technique using the Hoogland's system. So this is a targeted approach. The targeted approach means that you can directly land on the extruded herniation or a herniation which is in the spinal canal, and you can directly take it off without actually getting into the disc. So it's a more targeted approach which involves a foraminotomy before we actually enter into the spinal canal. So how do you start with this technique? Very similar to that of the inside out technique, that the skin entry point is dependent upon where the herniation is in the spinal canal. Now, the docking of the needle and the Tomshidi on the facet is a little tricky, and we need to understand that where we need to dock. Now, if you see the superior articular process, the superior articular process is a biangled bone. So you have the vertical component, and then you also have the horizontal component of the bone. The horizontal component of the bone is seen as an end-on picture here, and the vertical component is all overlapped with the inferior articular process. So now if you're able to divide your superior articular process vertical component into three parts, one is the dorsal 1/3, the middle 1/3, and the ventral 1/3, then you can approach you can dock your Tomshidi for herniations which are grade 1 and grade 2 in zone 3, and for herniations which are for grade 1 and grade 2 in zone 3, and for grade 3 herniations in zone 2. You never enter the zone 1 because foraminotomy in the at the level of 2 and 3 here will be limited foraminotomy, whereas foraminotomy in zone 1 will be extended foraminotomy, as this foraminotomy will take off not only the superior articular process bone, but it will also take off the articular surface of the superior articular process. And this kind of extended foraminotomy is used only in very severe stenosis or in conditions where you need a larger Camden's triangle or an axis, especially for interbody cage placements. Secondly, on the MRI and on the CT scan, if it is done, it is necessary to know the orientation of the facet joint. Now, if the facet joint is more horizontally placed, then you have to limit yourself only to the ventral 1/3 of the SAP, because getting in even 2 may take off some part of the articular surface of the SAP. But if the joint is more vertically placed, then zone 2 and zone 3 are to be a favorite sites for you to dock in your Tomshidi and get in through these areas into the spinal canal. Now, this is a pictorial depiction that you are keeping your skin point entry, because this tells where the herniation is. So if you have a central herniations, so your skin entry point is same, but with the changing grade of dorsal migration, the amount of foraminotomy that is required also changes. For herniations which are sequestered more dorsally, my personal suggestion is not to do a transforaminal surgery, but to do an interlaminar surgery and take it off, because the destruction of the facet joint can be minimalized, because otherwise you would be taking off too much of facet joint, which may cause iatrogenic instability, which is rare, because you are taking off part of the joint only at the level of the disc. Now, the primary foraminotomy which we do, why do we do a foraminotomy? We need an access. So if what is there underneath the facet joint is the exiting root, the part of the exiting root which is more medial, the axilla, the roof of the axilla, the floor of the axilla, and the traversing root. So these are the structures which are more medial and is overlapped by the facet joint. So if you do a foraminotomy like this, wherein you are retaining the articular surface and you're just taking off the part of the non-articular part of the superior articular process, you are able to gain access inside. So what all access you are able to see? This is a more enlarged view. You can see this is the traversing root, this is the exiting root. You have access to the axilla, the roof, and the floor. All access is possible if you have this kind of a foraminotomy. It becomes much easier for you to get the herniation off. The second most important thing to know here is, when you have a herniation in the paracentral region or any other superior or inferior migrated, these herniations are ventral. Now, in ventral herniations, the root and the thecal sac and the axilla is all pushed dorsally. So you still have a lot of room inside, because the epidural space dissection has already been done by the herniation. So you will dock your needle on the superior articular process, and then over a guide wire you would put a pointed Tomshidi. You would tap in your Tomshidi till you reach the medial pedicular line. You replace the pointed tip of the Tomshidi with the blunt tip of Tomshidi, so that you put in your guide wire and then replace it with the blunt tip Tomshidi. And once you put in your blunt tip Tomshidi, the guide wire is withdrawn and gently tap the blunt tip Tomshidi to the desired location. So once you have driven it to the desired location, the guide wire is put back again, and then you would start your serial drilling from 4, 5, 6, 7 to whatever size you need, or whatever kind of a size of a cannula that you want to put. So once the drilling is done, you would put your sleeve dilator first and then the sleeve. And if required, you do the sculpting of bone, because the drills would have taken off the gross part of the bone, the fine bone that needs to be taken, especially this medial beak needs to be taken either with the help of a Kerrison rounger by angulating the sleeve, or you may take out with a burr, multiple tools that you can use. And then you can decide whether you want to get in the disc to do your discectomy, or you want to just stay within the epidural space. So it's an inferior migrated herniation. You can see it's a large herniation practically touching the posterior lamina. It's a huge herniation which is seen here. So start with the needle and the guide wire. So the needle docked on the superior articular process inferiorly in the zone 2, and then Tomshidi introduced over a guide wire and docked on the SAP, on the AP and the lateral projection. You would put or tap the Tomshidi needle till the medial pedicular border. Now this is a pointed Tomshidi. Replace it with a blunt Tomshidi and drive it to the paracentral region or the target. The Tomshidi trocar is removed and you would replace it with a guide wire. And sequential drilling over the guide wire now commences. So you start with, you would first, before you put in your drills, you would do a soft tissue dilatation till the bone, and then drilling starts from 4. This is the 5 millimeter drill. This is the 6 millimeter drill, the 7 millimeter drill, and the 8 millimeter drill. So once you have done your drilling and the position and the angulation confirmed, you would put in your dilator, and over the dilator you would put your cannula or the sleeve. The sleeve is directed more caudally because that is where the herniation is. Now, parallelly, you would do a discography because I'm on directly in the epidural space. If I'm able to do a chromatodiscography, I will be able to stain the herniation. It will be good for me to locate it and to fish it out completely. So after removal of some part of the ligamentum flavum, I can see some blue stuff. Using the tang of the endoscope, I'm retracting the traversing root a little bit and gradually trying to get it out, tease the herniation so that it comes out. Now, during this time, you need to also look into the feedback of the patient because a large herniation is coming out. So this is a huge herniation, about 2.5 centimeter herniation, which came out. And you can see the free epidural space with some amount of bleeding. And then if you go underneath the root and the thecal sac, you see completely free epidural space, cranially and caudally. Now, the complication rates are very similar to that of inside out technique, not different. Neurological injury with outside in technique is again not very common. It's uncommonly seen. Now, these are usually seen in patients who are undergoing the procedure under some kind of a regional or general anesthesia. But if you are able to do your surgery under local anesthesia with the patient completely awake and aware, so this can be completely eliminated. And this technique has a more longer and a steeper curve than the inside out technique. See one, do assist one, teach one does not apply here. So it requires a long experience to get into outside in techniques. So it is better to start with the inside out technique, master the technique, identify the anatomy, and then graduate gradually to the outside in technique. It's a mature technique since we need to understand the trajectory, we need to understand the feel of the tissue when we are doing the drilling, and we need to understand the epidural anatomy because everything, when you go initially, everything looks alike. Thanks a lot for a patient listening, and thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Datta, for giving us an overview of the technique, which has fast become an interactive approach for all spine surgeons now. Thank you so much. No surgical procedure can be without complications, and it is imperative that the surgeon knows the likely complication and how to avoid and manage them. Our next speaker will be talking about this aspect of the endoscopic discectomy, and our next speaker is Dr. Mohinder Kaushal, who needs no introduction, but still, he's the chairman and the managing director of the Trinity Hospital and Medical Research Institute, Zirkapur in Punjab. So, Dr. Mohinder Kaushal, please.
Greetings from city beautiful Chandigarh. I feel honored for having been invited to deliver a talk on endoscopic lumbar discectomy, interlaminar complications and pitfalls, their avoidance and management. Thank you very much, team SDPGI, for inviting me for this August spine meeting. So my disclosures. So I will be covering various areas such as wrong level, bleeding issues and soft tissue intrusions, fluid use related, facet joint parts violation, dural injury, nerve root injury, infection, hematoma, inadequate decompression and residual fragment. So my experience is mainly with posterior interlaminar endoscopic discectomy. I have been using Destendu technique, arthrospine system, arthrospine DUB and unilateral bilateral endoscopy techniques in my clinical practice. So let's talk about wrong level. Wrong level entry can be avoided. It is good idea to correlate level on pre-op X-rays and MRI. Use last well-formed level as a guide. Needle when you are using, direct it towards the facet rather than midline. So that will prevent the dual puncture. In the Destendu system, usually we don't use a needle. There is a localizing device. And always it is a good practice once you have docked in the tube, check on AP view and lateral view so that your landing is correct, whether it is interlaminar or over the isthmus. Bleeding issues and soft tissue intrusions can be taken care of. As far as bleeding issues are concerned, make sure that abdomen is free when patient is prone. Relative hypertensive anesthesia is a help. Tranexamic acid can be used to minimize the bleeding. And for dry endoscopy, bipolar cautery is great help. And for saline, during saline endoscopy is the RF, which is a great help to control the bleeding. Then other modalities to control bleeding is gel foam, use of Surgicel. We all are conversant with these kind of use of this stuff in our spine practice, surgical practice. Bone bags also is of great help for uncontrollable bone bleed. As far as soft tissue intrusion is concerned, to avoid soft tissue intrusion, go along spinous process, try to be subparietal so that muscle tissue invagination is minimized. Cottonoids are also a great help when to address the muscle retraction and oozing. As far as fluid related problems are concerned or complications are concerned, here we apply a hydrostatic pressure to minimize the bleeding. And here we don't use a closed system. It is an inflow and outflow, gravity aided. And during regional or local anesthesia, usually patient will complain of posterior neck pain if there is a high fluid pressure is there. And headache and seizures and vision loss can ensue later if this high epidural pressure is not taken care of. And if these kind of symptoms are experienced by a patient, it is good idea to convert to dry system, tube, or maybe to open spine surgery. As far as facet violation is concerned, this usually happens when you are working on higher levels, especially L3, 4 and above. And one side breach doesn't has much of a significance, neither it causes instability. But when you're doing a conventional open surgery and if both the facets have been breached, then surgeon may have to consider a fusion. And as far as facetectomy during spine endoscopy is concerned, these patients are mostly asymptomatic. Some patients may complain of thigh pain with loading of the spine, and simple bracing and bed rest and analgesics usually helps these patients to recover from this kind of pain in 2 to 4 weeks time. And by end of 6 weeks, these patients settle down fully. And now there are studies which prove that single facet violation usually doesn't cause any kind of instability. And to address dural injury, it usually happens when we use a nerve or dural retractor for a long time, or accidental bite by a Carrison punch. And this usually happen when you are exposing the dura laterally and shoulder of the root. That time it is a good idea to put in a small cottonite patty to cause gentle retraction of the dura and the nerve root, and try and minimize the use of a retractor. And especially when you're working around recess, it is surgeon got to be extra careful to not to inadvertently use a Carrison punch, especially when you're using a lumbar canal stenosis surgery. Now, managing dural tear in endoscopy, I think most of the dural tears are very small. They are between 5 millimeter or so. Tears are so small that they can be simply addressed by a simple fat graft or by a use of a gel foam. Small tears, no rootlet herniations, really doesn't need any active intervention except for watertight closure. But tears with rootlet herniations need that these rootlets must be reduced and then subsequently cover the defect with a muscle or fat graft, or can be augmented with a gel foam, then followed by watertight facial closure. Big tears, usually surgeon has to consider dural patch, suturing, or they can be repaired with the anasto clips. And if endoscopically it is difficult to repair these tears, it is good idea to convert to open procedure. Nerve root injuries usually occur while working on a recess. The traversing root usually found coursing below SAP lamina junction of caudal vertebra are commonly injured, and axillary disc also at times pushes the traversing nerve root laterally. And that time when you are trying to bite a part of the facet, that time this nerve root is accidentally injured. So surgeon should keep in mind aberrant roots also. And it's a good idea to start from a midline, then to lamina, and then to a facet. So go from a less tight area to a more tight area. Preserve the deep layer of phlegm till all bony clearance is done, and ensure adequate clearance in recess before mobilizing or retracting the shoulder to assess the disc. Infection could be surgery related or patient related. Usually it has been seen that risk of infection is more after discectomy as compared to stenosis patients. So it's a good idea that once you have learned these techniques, you minimize over time, minimize repeated entry into disc space, flush disc space with a saline, and antibiotic mix is also used. I usually use amikacin to flush the or irrigate the disc space after completing the procedure. And discitis, usually we rely on clinical parameters, lab and MRI. Initially, conservative treatment is started with IV antibiotics followed by oral antibiotics, analgesics and bed rest. And serial clinical and lab response is observed. And if patients show no improvement in 2 to 3 weeks time, endoscopic lavage can be considered. And end of 6 weeks, if still patient is in severe back pain, fusion and debridement can be carried out, and bacteria can be identified in the lab, and accordingly antibiotic can be started. If still no clinical benefit, open or endoscopic fusion is a good idea if lavage has not helped. But in my clinical practice, I have not fused any of the patients who got infected. Usually these patients settle down in about 4 to 6 weeks time, and usually they autofuse by the end of 1 year. Hematoma, this risk is more in patients on blood thinners, less risk in endoscopy compared to open procedures. Ensure good hemostasis before concluding. Drain use in saline endoscopy also can be used to reduce the risk. Mostly these small hematomas are asymptomatic, but if worsening neurology is there, MRI showing a collection, it is better to re-explore and evacuate the hematoma at the earliest. Residual fragment, selective discectomy is desirable. Usually in younger patients, disc is more hydrated, so more chances of retained fragment. Smoking and end plate degeneration also add to this risk. Mostly hidden subannular fragment is the culprit. Angered disc forceps and angered hook help in retrieval of these fragments. Avoid aggressive analotomies. Flushing disc space, Valsalva on table, cuffing help in assessing any loose fragment, especially when patient is under local or under regional anesthesia. Now the complication, these are complications in our series. You can see dural tears, discitis, nerve root injury recurrence, and superficial wound inspections. We have in the last almost 18 years, we have operated close to now around 4,000 plus cases. And these are the complications which were observed in our series. And to summarize, great improvements have been achieved in developing better techniques and tools in treatment of spinal disorders by minimal access endoscopic route in last decade, thus making spine surgery safe and effective. Strict indications, proper pre-op planning, aseptic techniques, skilled operation, and proper rehab exercise are effective ways to reduce complications. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mohinder, for a comprehensive discussion of various complications and also their avoidance and management options. The delegates can choose any type of endoscopic dissection that they want to do, but they should be well versed with the potential complications of all the procedures. And Dr. Mohinder has very comprehensively and beautifully explained all the complications and also how it can be avoided and managed. I thank all the speakers for an excellent presentation and hope the delegates would have gained immensely from these talks and will be more confident in the lumbar endoscopic procedures. We now move on to the discussion and the question answer part. There are many questions, there are about 15 to 20 questions, but we shall limit ourselves to about 4 to 5 questions. So the first question is to Dr. Mohanty and Dr. Sukumar. They're asking that there are so many endoscopic approaches for lumbar discectomy. So how should a young neurosurgeon decide which approach to choose for a given patient? Dr. Mohanty and Dr. Sukumar, if you can take up this question.
So, for the young neurosurgeons, I think you should be well versed with the open technique first. I don't think as soon as you pass out from your residency, the first thing you do is an endoscopic procedure. Our first thing is to get well versed with the microdiscectomy, open microdiscectomy first, for interlaminar the approaches, either the Destando or the technique shown by Dr. Sura. I think that is the approach which most of the surgeons will be familiar with initially. Transforaminal, as Dr. Datar showed, has long learning curve. I don't have any experience in that, so I would not comment on that. But I think first would be open. After open, then you can go for Destando or interlaminar endoscope techniques.
Sukumar and Dr. Datar, would you like to add on to what Dr. Chandan said? You are muted. Sukumar, you are muted. Can you just unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, I fully agree with Dr. Mohanty. Any resident or any beginner wants to learn this technique, endoscopic technique, better to have an open understanding of open anatomy. I say 360-degree anatomy rather. So most of the time we only deal with interlaminar traversing route. We see traversing route. We don't know the lie of exiting route. So to understand anatomy better, endoscopy 360-degree around the facet joint, better is to assist as much as possible open T-lift cases. So in T-lift cases, what happens, you are doing a facetectomy there. So you can see the exiting and traversing route better. So you can understand the 3D anatomy, what is below and what is above the facet, what is around the facet. Then you start doing open or microscopic discectomies, you get more confident of handling the tissues better, then you can go for endoscopy. And endoscopy, if you want to start interlaminar, is easier for any surgeon because the anatomy is easily understood. And choose simple cases where the facet drilling is not required initially. So such cases, after say 10 cases or 15 cases, you know how to the use of scope and the instruments which are more fragile. So then we can go for a complicated case or where the drilling is required. So best is open cases, understand the 3D anatomy, then go for endoscope.
I'll just make one small comment. I mean, everyone saw the beautiful videos showed by Dr. Chabra, Dr. Sura, Dr. Datar, but you don't understand how much of it is due to practice, knowing how to go in, go out, keep everything in focus. The videos appear very smooth and easy, but believe me, for a beginner, it's not. It's very easy to get confused as to where you are. Dural tears are very common during the learning phase. So don't get overawed by the videos of these experts. They are experts for a reason, and the way they handle the instrument going up and down, medially, laterally, retracting the roots so easily, it is not easy for the beginners. Let me tell you that.
Dr. Datar, what is the learning curve for percutaneous transforaminal approach?
Primarily, my basic suggestion would be to go ahead with an inside-out technique where there is a definite docking area. We have a safe corridor within the disc. This is basically for all these paracentral herniations, which are very much contained, and non-migrated herniations. That is herniation at the level of the disc. I would always suggest that these are the kind of cases that you should go ahead with, at least for the first 30-35 cases, to understand the anatomy. Because what we are seeing through the endoscope is microanatomy, and we cannot relate it to adjacent structures. We don't see most of the times in the initial part the pedicle and the other things from where we relate our anatomy. So it becomes extremely difficult. Once you are well versed with the anatomy, and then you can progress ahead with other techniques where you can use foraminoplastic techniques, or you can do partial pediculotomies, and then more probably your mobility in the foramen and in the spinal canal is much superior. Though I would say for transforaminal surgery, anywhere around 40 cases should be good enough. Though the paper, there has been a published paper on the learning curve of transforaminal endoscopy by Rudolf Morgenstern, and it's been about 75 cases according to him. But I think 40 cases is sufficient enough to understand.
Thank you. Another question is for Dr. Satnam and Dr. Mohinder. Regarding that, they are asking that can Destiny technique be used for recurrent surgery? And if it can be used for recurrent surgery, then what are the modifications that needs to be made to prevent any complication? Dr. Satnam and then Dr. Mohinder, please. Dr. Satnam, you are muted. Can you just please unmute yourself?
Sorry.
Yeah,
So yes, this technique can be used for the recurrent disc herniation. If you have gone in endoscopically earlier, you can go in. But if once someone has performed laminectomy, then it will be difficult to go in because you don't have proper bony landmarks there. And then the technique is again the same. You have to identify the bony landmarks. You have to identify the limits of fenestration earlier, and then go along the bone and then start decompressing that and identify the nerve root and remove the recurrent.
Dr. Mohinder, if you can just add something, how to minimize complication in a recurrent case?
I think in addition to what Dr. Satnam has mentioned, I mean, in redo procedure, recurrent endoscopic discectomy, we always stay outside the scar. The scar which is preformed already there. So we land on the bony landmark as Dr. Chhabra has stated, and we make it a point that we don't get into the scar because the scar is like a minefield. I mean, there is a strong adhesion between the scar and the dura. Moment if you venture into the scar and do fiddling there, you will surely land up with a dural tear. So key is stay outside the scar. In addition to look for a bony landmark, take a CT scan of the patient and X-rays and correlate them to where you have to land and where is the bone available, especially when it is a laminectomy surgery, previous laminectomy. Usually you may have to land on the pedicle and then track the nerve root and then reach the disc. That is what I can add in addition to what Dr. Chhabra has stated.
Dr. Mohanty, you wanted to add something, please?
So another useful tip is to approach, especially in a patient with a previous laminectomy, is to approach it from the contralateral side. So when you approach from the contralateral side, you have a clear, you know there's a bone there. You can drill the base of the spinous process and go. Again, the problem is going to remain when you are doing an open laminectomy, the scar between on the exposed dura and the muscle. That you cannot avoid, but you have a clear bony landmark when you go from the contralateral side. Obviously, you cannot do a contralateral central disc herniation or paracentral disc herniation, but more for a lateral posterolateral disc herniation, it works well.
Can changing the approach help? Like if it was an interlaminar, then going a transforaminal, if it is an indication that can, because we are going through a virgin field, can that help, Dr. Datar? If you can just elaborate on that.
Yes, I mean, if you personally think that there is a small herniation which is lying underneath, so the pathology is primarily ventral to the neurological structures, and to access ventrally, foramen is the best route. So if the interlaminar area is not a virgin area anymore, and you are expecting some amount of fibrosis and all these things, it's always good to go transforaminally and take it off.
Another question is for Dr. Datar and Dr. Sura, that how do you do a transforaminal approach in a patient who has facetal hypertrophy? And Dr. Rishabh is asking that how much percentage of the facet can be removed without any need for fixation? So Dr. Datar, Dr. Sura, and Dr. Mohanty can please take up this discussion.
Yeah.
Facetal hypertrophy.
Yeah, regarding the interlaminar, I think Sukumar will speak on that. As far as transforaminal is concerned, we need to first identify the anatomy of the superior articular process of the facet joint. If you see morphologically, about 60% of the facet joint is at the level of the pedicle, which is the inferior pedicle. About 40% of the facet joint is at the level of the disc. So you can take off good amount of facet joint, keeping the articular surface intact. But by chance, even if you take off the part of the superior articular process with a little bit of the medial part of the joint, you still don't violate the stability of the joint. You still retain it.
Yeah.
Regarding the approach.
See, we need to understand what part of facet joint is causing the stenosis. Whether the facet joint pathology is causing foraminal stenosis or whether it is causing the lateral recess stenosis. If it is causing lateral recess stenosis, it can be addressed both through foramen and through interlaminar approach, where we try to drill the medial border of the inferior facet and a part of superior facet and remove the ligament. So if it is causing foraminal stenosis, then better we go through the foramen. And as Dr. Datar said, we are drilling the non-articular part of the facet. So, and most of the tip of the facet. So we can easily drill the tip of the facet and the non-articular facet easily to create a good space there and access the exiting route and the lateral recess. Decompression can very well be done through foramen. But if you're dealing with a pathology where it is more in the lateral recess, like say facet cyst due to degenerated facet joint and overhanging facet capsule, which has calcified or sometimes ossified, and hypertrophied ligament along with it. So then we need to address all this soft tissue, extra calcified or ossified tissue, and we can drill what to say, at least nearly 1/3 of the medial part of the inferior facet and a part of superior facet easily till we reach the lateral edge of the root, traversing root, which is free of any compression. So the moment you see the lateral edge of the traversing root from top bottom, that is the end of our facet decompression. So that should be our end point in interlaminar approach.
Mohinder, you also touched upon the that if the facial resection is done, still there might not be too much of complications. Can you just elaborate, even if the question was how much percentage of the facet can be removed and what is the long-term risk of need for fixation? So if you can just elaborate on that.
I think the surgeon should try to preserve facet as much as possible, but up to 1/3 facetectomy is okay. I mean, that should not cause any problem with the patient. And in my practice, I think where I on table, I know that I have done a significant facet removal, as I stated, especially at higher levels when I am doing L1, 2 or 2, 3, where I want to have more lateral clearance and anatomically space is less. So usually these patients have not come back to me with the, back pain or that kind of problem. So I think even single 50% facetectomy also, patients are okay. I mean, they are not, they don't complain. I mean, as far as I'm talking about spine endoscopy, that's what my experience is.
There was one question, and
literature says otherwise, but I am quoting you my practical experience of almost 18 years now.
So one more point is that we should always also look at the MRI, how the facets are. If the facets are sagittally located or coronally located. Coronally, you will be able to take your 50%. When it's more sagittal, usually you have to be a bit more careful. But usually for endoscopy procedures, you don't damage the capsules, and that makes a lot of difference. As Dr. Kaushal was saying that instability is usually rare with endoscopic procedures because you don't go and damage the capsules as such. You usually do the undercutting, under drilling that, and that usually keeps it stable. But you should look for the facet alignment on MRI pre-operation.
There was one question, and it actually has 3 parts. How do you manage a superiorly or inferiorly migrated disc? So, Dr. Mohanty, if you can take up that question, that if a disc is superiorly inferiorly migrated, what technical changes you need to make in the procedure?
So if it is superiorly migrated, then obviously you need to take out part of the superior lamina. As Dr. Jayesh showed in his sawbone model, the important thing is that when you're taking the part of the lamina, it is important, upper part of the superior lamina. It is important that you leave the pars intact. You should not be overtly aggressive in drilling down the down the parts. I think that is the main thing for a migrated disc.
Dr. Satnam, there is a question that if there's an axillary disc, this is in the axilla. So how do you tackle that? Because there's unnecessary traction on the nerve root then. So how do you prevent that?
No, basically the technique is same. You follow the same technique what you do microdiscectomy. So if the disc is there in the axilla, you have to go to the axilla rather than retracting the nerve medially. You have to go to the axilla. Maybe you will have to remove the little bit part of the inferior lamina if you really have to, and go into the axilla and remove the disc from there. The technique is basically the same. It's only that you are doing under endoscopic vision.
The last part of the question is about calcified, partially calcified disc. So Dr. Datar, if you can take it for transforaminal, and Sukumar, if you can take it for the interlaminar. If there's a partially calcified disc, then what modifications you need to make so that you can minimize the complications?
Yeah, calcified disc can definitely be removed. So be it end plate osteophytes or the disc per se or the herniation per se, which is calcified. There are a lot of cutting tools that are available with transforaminal as well as interlaminar. I'm sure Sukumar will highlight on that interlaminar tools. But for the transforaminal tools, you're basically looking at two kinds of tools. One is a front cutting tool, one second is a side cutting tool. The tool that I showed in my talk, which was the reamer, this is a side cutting tool with the front end completely safe and protected. Now there is a second kind of a tool which is cutting in the front. Now both these kind of tools, the front cutting tools, also have other tools like powered drills, you have osteotomes, you have curettes. So with the help of these equipment, you can still manage to remove good amount of calcified discs as well as bone. And it's much more easier to do it because you really don't have to retract the neurological structures, because everything is just above you. There's no retraction required. So you can safely do it, especially if you're using power tools. Then you have guarded or hooded burrs. So it's guarded on one side, which can be directed towards the neurological structures. You can still manage to take off calcified discs as well as bone.
Yeah, as Dr. Datar said, both can be tackled via transforaminally and interlaminar approach. Transforaminally, it is little bit difficult because we are in a fixed angle and the mobility is little bit less there. And interlaminar, you are already landing on the disc space, and your root is retracted in full endoscopy. So you can use all the tools which are available from drill, osteotome, and handheld reamers like what we call it as mill. The cutters. So we can use all these instruments, and most of the time it can be easily broken. And we need to see in the pre-op MRI and CT, if possible, or X-ray, that whether the calcification is complete or it is partial. And also the location of the osteophyte is important. So if we can understand this better, so planning, when we go inside, we don't see any challenges. And most of the time it is towards the foramen, the osteophytes are more between the traversing and exiting route, where the osteophytes and the calcification is more. So if you don't deal with this, the patient continues to have some kind of back pain and radiculopathy, and one of the important cause of failed back syndrome. So we need to address, you break and go inside, or first remove the disc fragment, soft fragment, and then deal with this hard structures. And it is possible both transforaminally and interlaminar with the tools we have available today.
I wish to add a point here.
Yes, sir.
There's an additional tool that both these endoscopic procedures have, and that is the holmium YAG laser, which we use very aggressively. So holmium YAG laser is a controlled laser which can be used for ablation of bone as well as soft tissue. So it's not tissue specific. So 80 or 100 watt holmium YAG laser can be safely used during this procedure, especially transforaminal procedures, because the patient is awake and aware and it's done under local anesthesia. And aggressively, you can take off any kind of a calcified or an ossified disc. That is not a problem.
Thank you so much. And I thank all the speakers and the panelists for sparing their precious time. Thank you all. Now we conclude the session and proceed to our keynote session. And I would now request Dr. Kuntal to please take over. Thank you.
Thank you.